Welcome to Digestible Academia, a Blue Sky Thinking podcast where we break down complex academic research into something a bit more digestible. Each week, we'll be choosing a topic to discuss and do a deep dive into some of the most interesting articles published on blueskythinking.com about that topic. We'll be discussing the findings of the research and why it's relevant to you. This week, we're joined by my co-host, Kerry Ruffle, and Jamie Hose, who is an account manager at Blue Sky Education. Welcome, Jamie, to the
podcast.
Thank
you. Lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you. This month, with Trump's inauguration, everyone's talking about leadership. In this episode, we'll be discussing 3 articles recently published on Blue Sky Thinking, including how businesses should create an environment not suited to narcissists, how leaders can create an inclusive, supportive environment for employees, and how to break bad news as a manager. So the first article we'll be discussing is an article called "Does Your Workplace Help Narcissists Thrive?" So this is based on a Durham University study which found that narcissistic leaders behave differently depending on the work environment. So in competitive, high-pressure workplaces, they're more likely to act selfishly, which makes their teams lose trust in them. However, in workplaces that don't prioritise learning and collaboration, there's nothing to discourage their selfish behaviour, so trust also suffers. So this study was run by Professor Suzanne Braun and surveyed 546 leaders and 1,718 followers. She says that organisations can reduce the negative effect of narcissistic leaders by creating supportive, learning-focused environments and not relying solely on competition and performance targets. So what do we think about this study?
I think that it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think that competitive people are naturally drawn to competitive roles.
Yes.
And there's a really fine line between, being competitive and looking for that level of success in yourself. And that comes quite close to narcissism.
Yeah.
And if you're looking particularly at leaders, particularly some of the most powerful people you see in the world, there's a healthy degree of self-interest there. The people that are going to be the ones that are most determined to do well, to push their companies, to push themselves to succeed, they're not going to solely be doing it for altruistic reasons. It's going to be a bit of self-promotion in there and themselves doing well, as well as the companies they're representing. So it's a difficult one for businesses, because if you want the best people, the ones that can get the best results, can speak well, can make those relationships, can help them to grow and to thrive, you need someone who's confident. You need someone who can take that on and want to do it.
Yeah, so that link between narcissism and being a good leader, then you're saying?
Well, being a successful leader, perhaps, because I think, again, good is one of those things that can be quite, how do you define good? Do you do that based on results and how much profit you make, or being a good person, having good attitudes, those sorts of things? So perhaps good isn't what comes into it, but if you're a company and you're looking for somebody to take on that leadership role and to drive a business forward, you need somebody who has the appetite to do so. And I guess it's where you draw the line as to where that appetite becomes too much and then is at the detriment of other people that are working for you.
Yeah.
I think that appetite's a really interesting point, because there is a nuance that is important to draw between competitive and narcissistic. A competitive person would want highly capable people around them to compete against, because they recognise that the competition helps them to up their game and continue to improve. So a competitive environment, while it might not be for everyone, it's still sustainable. But a narcissistic person wants all of the limelight for themselves. So in a leader, that's just, the difference is, I suppose, that's not sustainable in the same way.
So if a leader's very focused on their own success rather than their teams, how do you think that's then going to affect employee morale or employee trust, for example?
I mean, I can only talk about that from, my own perspective of how I would feel. I'd like to think I'm not particularly narcissistic. I'd like to think that I'm a team player and that I work for the betterment of everybody. I don't particularly like sort of putting myself front and centre. So I think certainly if I was working in an environment that dedicated all of their energies towards one person, supporting one person, I mean, in terms of spotlight, I wouldn't want anything on me, so that's fine. But in terms of then actually just receiving some general recognition for what I'm doing and how I am then contributing, I think that could get really old really fast if you then feel like you don't, the effort you're putting forward isn't then recognised and appreciated and attributed to you, because it doesn't matter how much you love a job or you like the company that you work for, everyone who goes into a job is also doing it to get ahead, to build themselves, to get something out of it. And it's not just a paycheck. So you want to have opportunities where your work is seen and valued and seen as mattering. So then you can take the next step forward.
If you're feeling discouraged in your work because of the leadership, then that's going to reflect badly on the leader in general, isn't it? So it's kind of in their best interest, even if they are a narcissist, to make their employees, feel like they are, valued in the company. What do you think, Jamie?
I think it is really important. Everyone needs, sort of, to use a parochial term, a pat on the head every now and then. We spend a vast amount of our lives actually at work and in the workplace. And so people quite naturally want to feel like that time is actually well spent. They want to feel like they have achieved something, that is not just about getting the paycheck at the end of the month and then you can continue to sort of go through the same cycles again and again. People want to derive, or most people want to derive, some sense of meaning, I think, from the work that they do. And having someone say, well done, you've done a great job, it enables people to feel like they're actually accomplishing something, they're working towards a particular mission, and that ultimately that time is well invested and well appreciated.
Yeah.
So how do you think a leader's behaviour might change when they're in a very high pressure, performance-driven environment?
I guess a lot of that depends on sort of what the environment is and what the company culture is like as well.
Okay, so for example, say it's a very high pressure sort of sales job, maybe, or
it's like my idea of personal. I think, again, with things like that, where those sorts of environments, people are very much out for themselves, aren't they? Because their jobs very much depend on whether they can hit a target, whether they can get there before other people. It's less of a team environment in the sales role, I think. So some of that, I think, can be quite self-serving. And that can perhaps become quite discouraging or quite toxic at times. I know that Suzanne Braun at Durham, she's done quite a lot of work into narcissism in leadership and how workplaces can harness that and can encourage it to best effect. A previous study that she worked on looked at giving sort of four areas where a company can sort of adapt their practices to make sure that those narcissistic personalities within a company could be managed to best effect to the betterment of everybody. And that included everything from, making sure these people are entering the right roles for them so that they're not domineering other people. So roles where they actually have built in that opportunity to shine, to be the person that's front and center, that can take a lead on projects, that can have that spotlight on them because they thrive in it and they do well in it.
Yeah, and as you said before, a lot of narcissists can be very effective at their job.
Yeah, this is it. Narcissism doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing if it's managed correctly. Another part of that looked at things like making sure your company has a really good ethical grounding, so that whatever policies your company puts forward if it has a good grounding in ethics, and then you are motivating your staff to abide by those rules. Any narcissistic personalities within a company are going to want to do well, to be seen to want to do well, to get that pat on the head that you mentioned and be recognised as a good person and a good worker. So that they are then going to abide by those ethical rules, which means they're not ever going to really take it too far. So there's that at play as well. And then things like reward systems as well. Not everyone's in work for a paycheck, like you say. Obviously it's fantastic. Everyone goes to work to earn some money, of course, but rewarding people for a variety of things in a variety of ways. So appealing to what then works best for people, whether it's narcissists or ones around them, and making sure everybody gets the opportunity to be recognised.
Yeah. But do you think some of these environments might encourage narcissistic behaviour from others?
Absolutely. I think when you're pitted against other people, it naturally appeals quite well to someone who's purely in it for their own personal benefit. I think that it allows those people perhaps to sort of more easily float towards the top. But there can be a lot of advantages in environments like that to people who've got those slightly more narcissistic traits. For example, narcissistic leaders can be very, very effective at sort of selling a particular vision or a goal to the rest of the team, because a lot of the time, especially if that goal or that strategic objective is tied towards their own advancement, they believe it 100%. And so it's very easy for them to then get other people to also believe in that and invest their time in it. But the crucial thing is, it's all short term. People can't just devote themselves entirely to furthering someone else's career for an indefinite period of time. And people can't miss out on opportunities because someone else is hogging them all indefinitely. It's one of those things where we saw a couple of years back, the media was very focused on the Great Resignation as being a big phenomenon when we were coming out of COVID-19. And then after that, we had all of the talk about quiet quitting and things like that. And a lot of the places that were reporting on this, they're reporting the big reasons why people are doing things like that. Almost, the top reason on almost everyone's minds was they were dissatisfied with workplace culture. Even above things like seeking better pay opportunities elsewhere or career advancement or anything like that, they just weren't happy with the culture that they were in. They were feeling burned out. They were feeling like they just were not caring about the work anymore. They weren't receiving the recognition, or they were dissatisfied. They felt like it was a highly toxic environment, like you said, Kerry.
Yeah.
So it's whilst those skills can serve a narcissistic leader well in the short term, it's not a strategy for long-term success.
Yeah, lots to think about there. Okay, so going on to the next article, this is about DEI and creating environments where every employee has the opportunity to succeed. So Larry Small, who is a PhD candidate at Virginia Tech, has done some research finding that addressing those unconscious biases and destructive leadership will create better workplaces in the long term. Whereas if you ignore it, this risks exclusion and failure. So he said that companies like Johnson & Johnson show how focusing on diversity, inclusion and accessibility can help build stronger and more inclusive cultures. He's given 5 strategies to mitigate destructive leadership, such as bias awareness training, inclusive leadership development, diversified recruitment, accountability, and support for marginalised groups. So can you think of any companies or workplaces that seem to do a really good job of promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility? And why do you think that is?
I mean, I must admit, I don't have a list of examples at the top of my head. I mean, he's done quite a good job of outlining a few there. And it's one of those things that I guess companies have put it at the top of the agenda for years and years now, and their reasons for doing so vary wildly.
Yeah.
I think companies that are truly committed, again, if their ethical values are in line and they are truly committed to making sure that a workplace is accessible to all so they can get the best people through the doors, make sure that they are open to new ideas, new approaches, and widening their workspace. If they are doing that in the right way, they get the right people through and it doesn't become something that's difficult.
Yeah.
If it's a bit like when you look at sort of greenwashing and sustainability, if a company's only doing it to tick a box, chances are they're not doing it very well. They're not going to become known for it. They might talk about it and plaster it all over their advertising, say, oh yes, we're very inclusive. But are they really,
Yeah, and it's quite clear when companies are doing that as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think sometimes things like DEI might get a bit of a bad rep because they're not applied in the right ways. It should be something that is essential to an organisation. There almost shouldn't need to be an effort for it because it should be there already. We know it's not. We know that's a huge issue. It's not there. I think for me, I think the concern lies in sort of how you apply it and where you put it. And like you say, if you're doing it on a surface level to look good or to gain something, then you're probably not doing it right or doing it well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. A lot of the time it does just amount to lip service, but it can be quite blatant when that is the case, because you might be watching sort of how a company announces that they're implementing new DEI requirements or objectives or whatever it might be, and then reverse it in a couple of years' time. You know that it was no significant progress has probably been achieved in that time. It was only ever a marketing strategy. And as marketing strategies go, it's not worth it. If you're going to renege on it in a couple of years' time, it's probably not worth the paper that it was written on.
Yeah. I mean, in an ideal world, the right people would be picked for the job, regardless of anything else beyond their capability to do the job.
Yeah.
That's the way it should work in a lovely, balanced, ideal society. We know that we don't have that. And we know that the world is full of biases, whether that is gender, whether it's race, whether it is religion or neurodiversity or physical ability. There are lots of different things that pose barriers to how people work, where they work, what they work in, how people perceive their work.
Yeah.
So we know that it's an issue that is always going to be there. And obviously DEI has quite it gets a bit of a bad rep sometimes. Either people think, like I say, companies aren't applying it well enough or effectively enough. It's been done, like you say, like lip service. And it's been done with a short-term goal rather than a long-term aim, and therefore it's never really going to be effective. DEI shouldn't be something that boosts sales or done as a PR exercise. It should be something that is actually intrinsically part of your company.
Yeah.
There's actually research from, again, going back to Durham University Business School, there's another professor there who has done, her name's Jackie Ford. She did a study a few years ago that found that a lot of DEI within companies actually isn't fit for purpose, because when the companies create these schemes, they don't actually consider who they're creating them for. They don't take the time to go and talk to them, find out what the issues are, and then design something with their recommendations in mind. So a lot of the time, I think the problem with DEI is, even if it had the best of intentions, it's just not been carried through particularly effectively. So, and then there's a backlash there, because people see that they have these DEI initiatives, they don't work, or they see lots of company time and attention being put into them with very little results and very little output from it. So then what do you do in that scenario?
Yeah.
So it is difficult. If it's done, it has to be done right, and it needs to be at the core of the company from the get-go.
It reminds me of those bots on X that are on International Women's Day, and they say what the actual gender gap is between men and women.
That's a really good
different
example.
Companies. Yeah,
you can't post saying we're a gender diverse. We're very pro women, when actually your pay and your stats and your hiring records don't reflect it.
And yet they're on International Women's Day, they're just posting it out.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Yeah, really,
it's the women equivalent of greenwashing, isn't it?
Exactly. So obviously, as we know, in the last few weeks, several major US firms, including Meta, Walmart, Amazon, have all rolled back their DEI programs. Because Donald Trump is returning to the White House and has vocally been very against these. He's been very, very critical of them. So what do you think this might mean for the future of inclusive leadership and DEI policies? Do you think more firms are going to follow suit, or?
Probably, but I don't think it's going to be particularly a long-term trend. I think that a lot of businesses recognise that there are definitely competitive advantages to having these DEI policies in place, because ultimately, if you can get the best person in the role for the job, that they're going to achieve the best results. And also, there are massive benefits in terms of giving you a competitive advantage when you've actually got different people with different experiences from different backgrounds and different areas of expertise sitting around the same table together. The ideas that you can generate, it's amazing for transformative potential. I think it really hits at what are the reasons why people would react against DEI schemes. In my mind, it's probably down to one of maybe two reasons. One is comfortability. If rejecting DEI is part of, if you have the same people around the table and they all look and think the same way, it enables you to sit in your comfort zone and do the same thing that has worked for you for the past 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Unfortunately, that's just not the way the world works. The world doesn't stay still for that long. So companies that do have these policies in place that continue to be very agile and transformative will outstrip those sorts of companies eventually. I think the other thing that's quite interesting about it is how DEI policies seem to have become quite politicized, because certain political groups tend to advocate for them more frequently. It now seems to become, whether companies have a DEI marker or not, seems to almost be a sign of political affiliations.
Yes, definitely.
So whereas it's a way of potentially signaling allegiance to one political party, especially when that's the political group that's in power, that's understandable why that might be advantageous for a company at one particular point. But when another group gets into power a few years down the line, or however many years it is, those sorts of companies are probably likely to flip back the other way again and then bring all these policies back in. So I don't think that this is a signal of where business is heading for the next 20 or 30 years, but it's probably a signal maybe of where businesses are heading, or a lot of businesses are heading for the next 5.
Yeah. So, for example, Amazon said that DEI policies are now outdated, and said it's winding down outdated programs and materials. It's also estimated that US companies spend around $8 billion annually on equity initiatives. So it would, in theory, save them money.
Yeah.
Is one of their arguments.
And I almost hate to say it because it sounds like I am not then championing DEI, but absolutely I am. But I think that, like you mentioned a second ago, with things like changes in political leadership, a lot of companies their reaction has been very sort of it's that trigger reaction of having to jump to something else very quickly to be seen to be doing things in a different way to remain favourable, or to try and curry favour, to try and be seen as modern and up to date, and to keep and maintain the connections that they want. And like you say, after a while that peters out, things mellow out, things calm down a bit. And I think in a way there was a bit of that when the call was made for companies to be more inclusive, to do more, to do better. I almost think there was that sort of bandwagon trigger response as well. A lot of companies threw lots of money at things like DEI or sustainability without actually taking the time to really think about how those schemes might actually benefit the people they're supposed to be benefiting. And as a result of that, I think there was a lot of schemes out there that didn't actually do the job and got a bit of a backlash because of that. So, maybe cutting back on things like Amazon have suggested outdated programs. That, to a degree, might not be a bad thing, so long as it is being replaced by stuff that is effective and does the job and is well researched and well considered and actually focuses on the people it's supposed to be supporting. If there's slightly less of them, but they're more effective, does that produce a better result?
But from what it sounds like, they're completely scrapping it. And as you were saying, Jamie, it's the people at the top that have always been leading the companies, and they're all the same sorts of people, and they all agree with each other because they have the same backgrounds. And, people might get rejected from really good roles because even though they're qualified for the job, they've got a certain last name that might put the people at the top off, and it gets rid of sort of maybe that blind hiring and initiatives like that, which is really detrimental to those people that are actually really good at their jobs but just won't get these roles now.
Yeah,
quite possibly. But also in other cases, it seems like there are potentially situations where people who occupy DEI roles as sort of officials at a lot of these companies might be being transferred to other departments, or the department is getting renamed or restructured or something like that. So it will be curious to see over the next few years whether there's an almost, I suppose, reversal on, like, flipping the traditional idea of greenwashing or rainbow washing or something like that, where a lot of companies are potentially looking to maybe push down their DEI departments in terms of media visibility, but they're still keeping them around because they recognize that there is some value in having these sorts of schemes. But if they want to sort of have whatever political affiliation it might be, or they want to send a particular marketing message, perhaps they're less vocal about it, but they may still be doing things sort of under the hood.
Yeah. I think publicly, if you go too far one way or another, you're going to get backlash, aren't you, from certain sections of society. So any company that's, like you say with Amazon, any company that is getting rid of things entirely, not all of their audience is going to be cheering, saying, what a fantastic idea. There's going to be a degree of anger because of that. I mean, that's why we're talking about it, right? So any company that can keep that level of nuance, that can adapt their practices as times change, but also keep the right priorities at heart. I think, I'd see those as the ones that are going to do well, rather than flipping what they're doing too radically, because also you risk sort of alienating your consumer base and those that you engage with. If you're changing the tune of what you believe to be important too often, how do you build a brand, or how do you build that recognition? How do people trust you? So I think any company that goes too far, the danger there is that they're missing out on great people, like you say, but also they're missing out on, expanding their consumer base and the people that they could be getting through the doors. So it's, I don't know, I wouldn't want to see any company completely disband what they are doing. Do it better? Yes, absolutely.
But that's what it does seem like. It seems like there's quite a radical flip the other way.
Yeah, it does.
Now there's a very right-wing government in power in the US, it does seem like a lot of companies have completely flipped what they said about DEI to the other way. And it's interesting to see such huge companies like McDonald's and Walmart and Amazon making these huge changes.
It'll be interesting to see, like you say, how that carries out and what the reality of that is.
Definitely.
Going forward. And
it's important to, I think, also think about the different arenas that these businesses are operating in. So whereas there may be pressure on a company like McDonald's to flip one way in the US, at the minute they're undergoing a lot of inquiries in the UK that mean that in other parts of the world they might want to actually think about running their scheme slightly differently. I think it will just be interesting to see how they manage their media work around that and their media engagement around the work that they might be doing in some places, whereas they want to keep it out of the media in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the next article we're going to discuss is about how to break bad news to employees as a manager. So, as we know, it's often quite difficult to control the spread of bad news in corporate settings, especially large corporate settings. Gossip is rife, as we all know. But Dr. Zara Wissel, who is the Associate Professor of Business Psychology at Nottingham Business School, emphasises the importance of regular, open, two-way communication between managers and employees. She says that communicating bad news poorly can alienate employees, especially in the case of layoffs or downsizing. She says that conversations should provide workers with honest updates, including how the broader company is doing and what, if anything, individuals can do differently to improve. And building this kind of open communications with employees often means being transparent about the reasons behind these difficult decisions. So Mario Rita-Deal, who is the Associate Professor of Management Studies at Aalto University School of Business, she says it's important to communicate and receive bad news if the measures are justifiable as part of a strategic plan, especially in the case of layoffs or pay cuts. Simply listening and giving employees the time to digest this bad news is really important. And further support should then be offered where possible, such as outplacement services or retraining opportunities in the case of layoffs. And seeking a constructive way forward for all people concerned is crucial because bad news has a wide ripple effect beyond those directly affected. So have either of you ever been in a situation where bad news was communicated at work, and how did your manager handle that?
I think everyone's kind of got those horror stories, haven't they? Whether it is people sitting in a room and finding out their job no longer exists. Or it could be something as simplistic as going to a job interview and finding out you've been completely missold on what you're there for. Everyone's had those awful situations in a workplace where they just feel like they've been, thrown under the bus, they've been taken advantage of, they've not got out of it what they expected, the respect isn't there. And you can take it on the chin and say, oh, it's only business, it's it's just work, they don't owe you anything, you turn up, you do a job, you leave, and no one expects to stay in the same role forever. But
so theoretically, if you applied for a job and you got rejected from it, how would you want to be told?
I think honesty and clarity, everything that the research suggests, actually. I mean, again, on the flip side of that, what it's like when you apply for a job and you don't hear back, and that sort of ghosting from a potential employer is, that's so demoralizing, and it does cloud your vision of how that company behaves. And that's why there's websites like Glassdoor and things like that tell you what a company's really like, so you can kind of gauge your own expectations. So I think that, for me, whether I was a manager in a position responsible for employees or whether I'm the employee on the receiving end of it, I feel like all my answers to you are the same today. Everything I'm saying is ethics and be mindful and care about the people that you're with. But certainly being clear about what you expect and what if you're a manager, what you expect of your employees and what the situation is. Delivering information accurately in a timely manner, giving people options to vent what they need to vent and ask the questions, and taking the care to actually think, well, if you're a manager and you're doing somebody out of a job, you're leaving them in the lurch. You've got a bit of a responsibility there. So what can you put in place to support them? Whether that is practical support or emotional support, where can you signpost them? What can you do? I can't imagine it's a nice experience for any manager either. So again, is that support in place?
Yeah. And obviously it's emotional from both sides. So you have that emotional responsibility as well to tell them in a way that is compassionate.
Yeah, and I think a lot of managers can sometimes fall into the trap of doing what's called Robin Hoodism, where they try and go, sort of out of their way to make it up to employees or try and soften the blow or do something outside of what necessarily a strict working environment to try and soften the blow, especially if they've had to make someone redundant, let someone go, announce, especially when it's in things like a wave of layoffs or something like that. Managers can feel this really intense pressure to make it right, because a lot of people, well, some people don't necessarily always think that the colleagues that they're working with, it's very easy, I think, to turn up to work, surround yourself with your colleagues, and then almost you don't think about what they do when they leave that work environment, what they've got going on outside of that. And at the end of the day, everyone's got a mortgage, or they've got bills, or they've got something that's riding on their job. So when managers are just aware that people have got lives outside of work, that this has an impact on, I think that it can be quite stifling to think about the amount of pressure that is on those managers' shoulders. I think the important thing is that, especially at large companies, it's a lot of the time it's the middle managers that have to go to people and announce that, say, a team's been laid off. It's then what you really need is you need the people that are at the more senior levels of management to then put support structures in place for those middle managers who have to deal with that level of responsibility. And then I think also ensuring that those employees are looked after can also alleviate some of the stress that those middle managers feel with things like retraining schemes that will enable them to move on quickly and efficiently and find other positions elsewhere, and keeps giving people those opportunities and showing that, yes, we have invested in you as a person, as a professional. We're continuing to do so. Unfortunately, this hasn't worked out, but we want to help. I think that at all structures of a company is really beneficial.
Yeah.
So do you think that would sort of soften the blow quite a lot if you were offered that retraining or that support after being let go from your job?
Oh, it'd be a massive reassurance. I think, because at the end of the day, I mean, my philosophy has always been any training that I can get my hands on, I'll take it.
That's a good philosophy, yeah.
I'll take it, because especially, and I think what especially helps with it though is if it's something that you can easily put on a CV. So especially if there's some sort of retraining that you can be offered, where it doesn't even have to be sort of like, oh, they've sent me off to go and get this qualification and I've got a nice shiny certificate or something like that. But even if it's training you how to use a piece of software or something like that, it's one of those things that you can just put on a CV and, okay, that opens a couple more doors for me. I think that's massively reassuring if one door closes, knowing, okay, right, I have options.
Yeah. I mean, I think nothing's ever really going to soften the blow. You lose your job. You're losing your job. It doesn't matter whether it's, being delivered to you harshly or softly. At the end of the day, you are still without a job. But I think it's about putting in place, like you say, the ability for people to move on from that, so that they're not just left to find their own way in terms of what they do next, how they manage their finances, or where they go, giving them the clarity, giving them the space, giving them a time frame, letting them know where the support is, facilitating with that as much as they can. But like you say, middle managers are under a lot of pressure as well, and they need someone supporting them.
Yeah. But
I think a workplace because sometimes layoffs are unavoidable, you can't always protect everybody, and things happen in an industry or in an economy that you can't prepare for. So if you are left with delivering bad news for whatever reason, doing it nicely and doing it considerately. Do people often leave reviews of employers saying, oh, they let me go really well? They don't, but they probably should, actually.
So thank you so much for joining us today, Jamie. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a pleasure talking to the pair of you as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Digestible Academia. You can find all of the articles we discussed on blueskythinking.com, and we'll link them in the description of this episode. In the next episode, we're delighted to talk to Mario Rita Dill, the Associate Professor of Management Studies at Aalto University School of Business. She'll be talking about how to share bad news as a manager, so be sure to tune in. You can also like, share, subscribe for more.